From inside a radio booth at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Flustered today. A lot going on that I forgot the name of our own podcast. Paul Mancano and John Meoli live on a Saturday in May to discuss the Orioles firing of manager Brandon Hyde, as well as catching instructor and Major League field coordinator Tim Cossins. We are going to break this move down from every angle and talk about what could be next for the Baltimore Orioles, as well as their performance today. A 10-6 loss to the Washington Nationals, hoping to be joined at some point by one or potentially both of our Orioles beat writers, Andy Kostka and Danielle Allentuck. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, John. First off, the Orioles like to make news on Preakness Day. 3 years ago, it was calling up Adley Rutschman on Preakness Day and having the catcher make his big league debut in front of a somewhat paltry crowd of about 17,000. And today, it is firing manager Brandon Hyde around noon today. Third base coach Tony Mansolino takes over as interim manager. He managed his first game today, went 0-1. John, what was your first reaction when you saw the news that the Orioles had parted ways with their manager?
My reaction was one of understanding. I don't think this, I think that anyone who talks about this in any truthful and honest way is not going to blame Brandon Hyde for the Orioles, nearly having a 333 winning percentage at this point in the season. This is not because of Brandon Hyde. When we talked about this, even earlier in the season, as things were starting to wobble, I think I was pretty careful to parse out that the stuff you see on the field, like the fundamental issues, the lack of focus, the errors and mistakes that you don't often see, that is Brandon Hyde's department, or was Brandon Hyde's department. That is the coaching staff's department. And I think the Orioles were not as sharp in those areas as they should have been. And they also were not as talented as I think they thought they were. Injuries played a lot into this, luck played a lot into this. Tony Mansolino just said that himself, but it's not the whole story. This was a team that was underperforming for a quarter of the season, and Brandon Hyde and changing the manager seat was really the one major lever that Mike Elias had to pull. He could not do a do-over and go sign an ace. He could not make a trade that he did not make in January and May. Those guys are on teams and their teams like him for the most part. There was not a lot he can do to make an impact. And who's to say this is even going to make an impact? But this was the lever he had to pull. And I think last night seemed like it was probably the tipping point to make him pull it.
Yeah, and last night certainly seemed like we've said over the last 8 months, really since the Orioles' second half slide of 2024, we've been wondering when they've hit rock bottom. And last night felt like one of those moments because they had just gotten swept by the Twins for the second time in a matter of weeks. And an incredibly winnable game. Winnable does not do it justice. The Orioles left 15 runners on base. They massively outhit the Washington Nationals, and they made critical mental mistakes, at least two, one by Felix Bautista, one by Adley Rutschman, that eventually allowed runs to score. You can say all you want about the starting pitching struggles, and a large majority of that blame should go to the front office and to Mike Elias for his and their failure to address the rotation. You can say what you want about the job that Cody Asche has done as hitting coach and the job that the players themselves have done and their lack of being able to step up to the plate literally and look anything close to the offense that we saw in 2023 in the first half of 2024. But when the team is making mental mistakes, when they are making what should be easy victories, losses, that is an area that is very easy to pinpoint as something that could be due to coaching. And the players bear the vast majority of responsibility when they win and when they lose. But that was one area where it felt like the team was not focused. It felt like they had checked out in a certain extent, and they were making, quite frankly, boneheaded blunders in the field. And when you've just lost 4 straight, you're 13 games under 500, and you go out there and you lose what should have been an easy win, that's a moment where you can point to and say, this is a moment where you need to do something.
Yeah. And as I'm thinking, as I'm listening to you, you know, these are all things that you could look at and say, like, this shouldn't be happening. And really, that's the whole Orioles season. That's everything that has happened. You know, I have written about and talked about extensively, like, how hard it is to wrap your head around all this stuff should not be happening. But for every defensible thing in the moment that it happens, whether it's signing, whether it's a trade, whether it's not signing someone, whether it's a bullpen move, whether it's a lineup decision, they all make sense in the moment. And then if they work out, they don't, you know, you can put your head on the pillow at night thinking, all right, that happened for a reason. I think there's a little bit of a difference of like watching a team not win a game that they should be winning and having the chances to do it and saying this should not be happening, but having the ability to do something about it. And this is like very hollow. This is not, I don't want to say that. This isn't a token thing. This is somebody's job. This is a person who has a family. Two people who have families and have to deal with the fallout of this. The Orioles players have to deal with, and they've said this, like, they got someone fired because of how they were playing. But this is kind of the move that you make at this point. It would have happened, I think, in a lot of places earlier than this. It would have happened in a lot of places for different reasons. It might have even happened last year. There was a lot of history to get through to get to this point for Michael Elias and Brandon Hyde and the Orioles. And that history is that this was on a trajectory going upwards for a long time. And at some point that stopped, and you could say that it plateaued. You could say that it leveled off. I don't think they were going to let that trajectory start going down very, very far before doing something about it.
Yeah. Let's get into that history, because you and I have both been here from before the moment that Brandon Hyde was hired. Back, I think our first season collectively was 2016. Mine as an intern, yours as a full-time beat writer, covering this team. And we saw a team that was managed by Buck Showalter, that was general managed by Dan Duquette. We saw that totally overhauled. We saw all of the talented players that Baltimore had accumulated during the years leave. Michael Elias comes in. He hires Brandon Hyde in December of 2018. Hyde takes over. His first 4 seasons are losing seasons. The talent on the field, there was nothing Brandon Hyde or his coaching staff could have done to change the results of those seasons. They were not talented teams. They were in the bottom of the league in payroll. And he was the guy that had to stand up there after every loss and answer questions about it. He took a lot of heat over his time, and it was gratifying for him, I'm sure, in 2023 to see them go from a team that had next to no talent become one of the best stories in baseball, one of the most talented rosters in baseball, and a team that won 101 games and won the division. And then the following year, they win 91 games, and the second half is a little bit of a struggle. And in both those seasons, they get bounced out of the playoffs without winning a playoff game. So to go from the depths of the rebuild to the heights of winning a division, and no, they didn't reach a World Series, they didn't get over the top, it is still a credit to what Brandon Hyde accomplished that he was able to stay through the rebuild. I said a few days ago with Kyle Goon, literally yesterday, actually, on our Banner Baseball show that now seems irrelevant, that it's very rare that managers who manage during a rebuild get to stay and see the success. I mean, the organization that Michael Elias came from, the Houston Astros, had Bo Porter as their manager. They fired him before they started winning games. And it sucks for Bo Porter because that's on his record as a win-loss record, but the teams weren't good. Brandon Hyde managed some pretty awful teams talent-wise, and there were times where they showed more than they should have on the field, and then he got to see them win. So to that point, it is a credit to Brandon Hyde that he was able to stick through the rebuild and still be able to manage a winning team.
Yeah, and I think that part of what made that the case was that Brandon Hyde didn't change at any point to get the team good. You know, he'd sit around every night or before every game and try to go through the matchups and go through the other team's lineup and stuff like that with his coaching staff and say, all right, here's what we have. If so-and-so comes up in this spot, we have this pitcher available. They would do that stuff when they were terrible and the pitchers who they had available were bad. And then all of a sudden they had good pitchers to bring into games. The in-game managing stuff that I think has frustrated people more recently is the same stuff that helped win this team a ton of games in 2022 and 2023. The way that he match up bullpens, 2024 to an extent, the way that he'd match up against other teams' bullpens, the way that he'd pinch hit, the way that he would maneuver through those late innings of a game. Like, the talent was better than the talent earlier, but the processes were the same. And I think that the reason he got another chance after the way the last season ended was because those processes never changed, and the Orioles weren't going to make them change because they were demonstrated over a period of time that with the right ingredients that they worked. As that was happening, they overhauled the pitching coaching staff after the 2023 season with Chris Holt stepping aside and Drew French and Mitch Plasmeyer coming in. Last year, the hitting coaches left. Cody Ashley was elevated. They brought in some new people. Cody Ashley said in Anaheim last week that it's the same thing. They built these infrastructures around Brandon Hyde that are more reflective of the Orioles organization than it turned out that Brandon Hyde was. And now they're in a situation where they have to rebuild the manager seat in the same way. And it's tricky. There's no, we can make a blame pie with as many colors as we want. Like, there's going to be a color with Brandon Hyde on it, and there's going to be a color with the front office, and the color with the players and luck and all that stuff. But for him to be in this position today, probably processing it, I'm sure he understands why it happened. I think anyone who's been paying attention to this team understands why it happened, and I think there's anyone who's thinking about it critically is also understanding that there's a lot more to it than the manager.
Blame pie has to be the worst flavor of pie. You'd have to think.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, is that one of those?
Rhubarb?
Yeah.
It's pretty terrible.
Yeah, definitely store-bought crust and blame pie.
I want Andy Kostka's opinion on whether blame pie is the worst possible flavor of pie, as he comes in straight from the Orioles clubhouse to join us to discuss the firing of manager Brandon Hyde, as well as Tim Cossins. And Andy, we talked to some players before the game. You talked to some players after the game. It is on. Welcome to the Banner Baseball Show, Andy. And I want to hear what you have to say about what you gleaned from the players when they spoke with the media before the game, as well as in the clubhouse after the game.
I think I just talked to Ryan O'Hearn, and his quote was, nature of this business is when guys don't perform, things change. And I don't think Hyde did anything wrong. We haven't performed, so it sucks. I think the players have an understanding that at the end of the day, Brandon Hyde is not swinging the bat or throwing the pitches. So this is an element of the players underperforming. At the same time, I think there is an understanding that this is a roster that Brandon Hyde also did not construct. This is Mike Elias's roster. So if there are overarching issues when it comes to this roster, we know who those, who made the decisions regarding who to sign, what the outlook should be for this team. Granted, there have been injuries. There have been underperformances that were hard to imagine. Thinking like Adley to this point.
Sure.
So without trying to, completely, throw everything on one pile, it's always more nuanced than that. Like, sure, did Brandon Hyde, was he, the leader of this group? And if things are flat, there maybe needs to be a leadership change. So I'm not discounting that, but I'm sure one of you, have said before I walked in, I don't know what you guys said, but it's not a, fix all to get rid of Brandon Hyde. That does not change everything. And as we just watched in this game, 6 runs against Kyle Gibson in the first inning. Clearly, there are issues with the roster construction, the pitching staff, that firing the manager does not solve that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Brandon Hyde takes no pleasure in seeing that the Orioles lost today, 10-6. I'm sure he's devastated, and nobody is closer with this clubhouse than Brandon Hyde. However, maybe defenders of Brandon Hyde would point to the fact that the Orioles got crushed today, that Kyle Gibson could barely make it out of the first inning, that Charlie Morton had to come in out of the bullpen because he was a failure as a starter, unfortunately, is evidence that these issues go way beyond Brandon Hyde. These issues go to Mike Elias. They go to the front office. He has acknowledged that. Elias has acknowledged that. He did so in a statement earlier today. He did so in an interview earlier this week. There were plenty of issues with the way this team was put together, but you're also seeing a lot of guys that have been productive in the past not be productive. You mentioned Adley Rutschman, Andy. Gunnar Henderson, you see flashes of his old self. He hasn't quite been there. You're seeing some young guys like Jackson Holiday slowly take some steps up, but other guys like Heston Kjerstad still has yet to progress to the point where he's a productive player. And you're seeing a lot of regression in areas that, frankly, you weren't expecting to see. So to me, that is an area that you could point to maybe and say, sure, Brandon Hyde didn't put together this roster, but he knew these pieces were going to be in place, and he still was not able to maximize the talent that was here.
And I think, and I'll leave you guys with this before I dip out of here and go on, finish my life. Yeah, it's not going to finish my life. That's right.
Enjoy your life.
And finish my day, enjoy my life. Is that Brandon Hyde not being the manager of this team is not going to materially, I don't think it's going to materially change like how players' seasons go or the team seasons go. But the fact that all of the underperformance was concentrated in the 6-7 weeks that it did is why this happened. We could be sitting here, if all these players are still on this team in September and look up at that scoreboard and Adley Rutschman's OPS could start with an 8, and Gunnar Henderson could be up around like 890, 900, and Ryan Mountcastle could be in the high 7s and low 8s. All these things that over the course of a season you expect to happen very well easily could happen. The fact that the Orioles pitching staff was not what it was supposed to be. The fact that, Gunnar Henderson misses spring training, Jordan Westberg and Colton Cowser and Tyler O'Neill are not healthy from the first week of the season on, basically. Those are the things that cost Brandon Hyde his job. And the fact that, when you said, Andy, that something has to happen. Ryan O'Hearn said something has to happen when players underperform. As we were leading up to this point, and people would ask me about, I'm sure you guys have had plenty of conversations in your life about like when this would happen and if it would happen and what would happen. Every time anyone would ask me, I would just shrug and say like, probably, because what else are they going to do? And also I would say that will coincide with people getting healthy and this team starting to play good baseball again. And it won't be because Brandon Hyde was fired. It will be completely unrelated to that. Now, that's not to say that Tony Manzolino won't do a good job. That's not to say that Brandon Hyde was doing a bad job. These are just the things that happen in a long baseball season. And I think that this happening when it did was to kind of try to knock the Orioles off the trajectory that they were on so that all the things that you would expect reasonably could happen.
Yeah. John, get out of here. Go live your life.
See you guys later.
Do a nice mic drop there.
Don't end your life.
No, I'm not going to end my life, but I'm going to contribute to its demise by drinking alcohol.
That's.
I'll be joining you in that later. Maybe not with you, but in the act.
In the act, yeah.
In the act.
I think after today, we have all earned a little bit, some kind of alcohol. Plus, it's a big day for journalism. Literally, as
I did see. I won't go on a anti-horse race tirade.
We'll save that. We'll save that for
the next podcast. If you guys want to hear those thoughts, that's fun.
Yeah. Let's talk about Tony Manzolino taking over in this position, because he was thrust into a very difficult spot, having to manage this team right now that is floundering, that is now 14 games below 500. And we talked to him after the game, and he said he still believes that this team can be a playoff team. I think he has to say that. I don't think he's going to be named interim manager if he says this team can't go anywhere and the season is over. But they are in a massive hole. And the comparison that a lot of fans have tried to use as an optimistic outlook for this team is the 2019 Washington Nationals, the same franchise that was here today. And Andy, I covered that team while I was working for Masson at the time. The first 50 games of that season were bad. They were 19-31, but they were losing close games. They were battling back. They were fighting, and there were issues around the surface that you could point to, but there was also a really good team underneath. I think this Orioles team has a ton of talent. However, I am seeing so many more issues with this roster, so many more issues with this team right now than that team. And to be 14 games under 500 at this point in the season, you're in mid-May. There's plenty of season left, but it's hard to look at what you've just seen for the first month and a half and say that you see a playoff team underneath here.
I agree with that, and I'm going to buy a little time as I look up the stat. First off, I'll read that stat in a second. First off, I thought Tony Manzolino actually did a really good job in that.
He did
that press conference. he has worked with Brandon Hyde closely for this is his fourth year as third base coach, now interim manager. But you work with somebody that long, you're probably friends. I would say we're friends.
Yeah,
We haven't even worked together that long.
No, it's been about 2.5
Yeah,
years.
so it's pretty impressive. But so you become friends with your colleagues. You don't want to see bad things happen. There's a human element, and when Tony Manzolino was asked about the emotions of this moment, being an interim manager for the first time in the major leagues, walking to the mound, for a pitching change. It was way earlier than he would want to walk to the mound with 2/3 of an inning into a game. That was not how he wanted things to go. But he actually said, this is the quote, "Not excited. This isn't a good thing for us. We're going to miss Brandon in a lot of ways." What I thought did a good job of saying is basically like, he's not viewing this as like some big break for his career. This is if you have a midseason, and what he's saying is if you have a midseason coaching change like this, whether it's your hitting coach like the Rangers did, or your manager like now 3 teams have done, the Pirates, Rockies, and now the O's. That shows that a team is not living up to expectations, and maybe in the Rockies case, there weren't many expectations, but especially for this team in Baltimore, you come in with I predicted them to miss the playoffs before the season, but I didn't expect this. I thought it was an 85-win team, which they still could be. I mean, it's definitely it's not easy, but there's a path. But most people thought this was a pennant team that is struggling massively. Why are they struggling massively? Really, it's this. I think a lot of it boils down to the starting rotation right now. They are out of games early most of the time. Today, you could take positives from the fact that Baltimore battled back in ways. They were down 7-0, scored 2 runs. They gave up 2 more runs, down 10-2, and then they scored 4 runs in the 9th inning. That's a positive sign. At the same time, the fact that they're down 10-2, like that, it's bad teams have a lot of blowout losses. That's a signature of a bad team. Good teams, they do 2 things. They win close games. They also lose close games.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah. They lose close games sometimes. That's fine. Like this is baseball. So here's something that I just want to point out.
And
when this team this year, if they are trailing after the 6th inning, they are 0-24, which is a complete departure from everything they did in 2023.
It's the complete opposite.
Complete opposite. And I people on Twitter were on my back already, which shout out you guys, about, like, hey, you're being such a negative Nelly about, this team kind of came back. It's like, yeah, okay, you scored 4 runs in the 9th inning. Congratulations, pat yourself on the back. Maybe you bring that into tomorrow, you win a ball game. But you were down so many doggone runs in the 9th inning.
Yeah.
You bring in Yennier Cano and Sir Anthony Dominguez, and they give up 3 combined runs in the top of the 9th inning. So those are massive issues. The fact that this bullpen is beginning to waver, and it will naturally begin to waver because of the stress it is under almost every single day. When, like, geez, if you didn't have Charlie Morton in that game, like, Charlie Morton saved that bullpen by going 4 1/3 today, and he looked good doing it too. So, like, props to him. But 6 runs against Kyle Gibson, not what he wanted to do, obviously. That's a major issue, and we've seen it too many times when there's big deficits early, short starts. It's going to stress a bullpen. It has stressed this bullpen. There's a lot of innings these guys are eating. Man, how different could that 9th inning be if they didn't give up 3 runs in the top of the 9th?
Yeah. And frankly, yet nice that they mounted somewhat of a comeback. They didn't even get it within a save situation.
Yeah.
Kyle Finnegan was not needed in this game because it was a 4-run game. And you're doing it against one of the worst bullpens in baseball in the Washington Nationals. I mean, it is an indictment of the team that's the most fight we've seen in what would have been a blowout game in a long time, maybe all season.
I will add too, they have allowed in games, they have allowed 4 or more runs. They are 5-27. And I'm really bad at math. I believe that is 32 games. And I believe this
It
is the 47th, 46th game of the season, something along those lines. Somebody can fact check me.
44th, I believe.
Sure. Okay. So if they've done that, 5 plus 26 being 5 plus 27 being 32, and this has been 44 games, and you've given up 4 or more runs in 32 of those games, that is a sign of a pitching staff that is not, not up to snuff
Yeah.
for major league level. And I completely, I wrote a large story on it this week about the issues with the hitting, and how there's, this is understandably, like, there's issues that extend beyond pitching, but there is something to be said about being behind in games frequently. And so maybe when people get healthy, when Andrew Kittredge comes back, that helps the bullpen. When, you have Zach Eflin back, pitches tomorrow, that's surely going to be a help. Sugano's been great. Cade Povich was great last night in a debacle of a loss that event, cost manager his job. So it's definitely, there have been good performances that the bats have not shown up. I mean, like, you should have won that game last night. That's inexcusable. And obviously it was inexcusable because it ended up being the last game.
Brandon Hyde didn't have an excuse.
Yeah. So that's a long-winded way. I don't know if anyone listening understood the thing I just said.
I did.
Well, as long as you did.
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's a good encapsulation of, people might box score scout, so to speak, or people might just look at the win-loss record and think that this team still has an opportunity, or blame injuries, to blame the slow start on Colton Cowser and Jordan Westberg missing time, and Ramon Arias missing time, and the rotation they're going to get after the All-Star break. They could get Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells back. There are so many other issues right now with this team, and it is a team right now that is not showing, that is flat. Use the word flat earlier. That is not showing much fight. That is not showing much hustle. And you just couldn't let it get to this point. You see them start slowly. The first couple weeks of the season, they're below 500, and you think this team is better than this. They will be able to stay around 500 until they get their key contributors back. They weren't able to do that. And as things snowballed, nobody, whether it was Brandon Hyde and the coaching staff, whether it was the players in the clubhouse, were able to stop it. And there have to be consequences for losing. You're not going to fire Brandon Hyde 44 games into the 2019 season because that team had no expectations. Yeah. This team had expectations, and they are far from meeting them. So there have to be consequences for losing. And my only hope is that the players understand, and it sounds like from what they've said they do, that Brandon Hyde was the one who was dealt the pink slip, but this is on everybody. This is the blame pie that everybody is sharing. And they're not going to DFA Gunnar Henderson. They're not going to option Adley Rutschman. Should not do that. Because Mike Elias doesn't have many levers to pull with this big league roster right now. You can't really do much to infuse some kind of life into this team. It's on them. They have to realize that they have to step up. And hopefully this move was a recognition that this isn't going to cut it. The losses are not going to be able to be brushed aside like they were in 2019 or 20 or 21 or 22. This is a team with expectations. The fan base expects more. And now the front office has said they expect more.
Yeah, I think actually there's two sources, said before the game after Brandon Hyde's firing that there was some level of frustration in the winter after Corbin Burns departed, and then throughout spring training when there is not a marquee addition to the pitching staff. And Sugano has pitched really well, so I don't want to take that away. That was a phenomenal scouting decision from the pro scouting department to identify Sugano wants to come to Major League Baseball, and the fact that he could perform well in Major League Baseball, that was great. But today, when we look at it, and you have Kyle Gibson followed by Charlie Morton. Charlie Morton pitched well, so I don't mean to throw stones, but his ERA just got below 8 for the first time this year. So that plays a part in this. Those were two major additions, quote unquote, major additions for the pitching staff, for the rotation. It's pretty clear that they did not address the rotation well enough. And you could say, and Elias has said, it was impossible to know the extent to which Grayson would be injured.
You're right.
That was hard to know. At the same time, not going out and getting an ace that could have big consequences for this team. And as we evaluate Mike Elias, I think rightly that is going to be the question that permeates throughout the 2025 season, 24 off season, 2025 off season, into the 25 season. As we decide, oh, look at all those crows up there. That's cool.
Yeah.
There's a murder of crows listed the window. Sorry. I think that will be, and I think it could actually, come down to that might push him at the trade deadline to really be aggressive, or this team is going to be so far out of it that he is going to look for controllable arms by trading away players that are, out of team control.
Yeah.
And pitcher, players like that would, could be Zach Eflin, could be Cedric Mullins, could be Ryan O'Hearn. That is not a sourced thing. That is purely gut.
Right.
But that is, that's a option that could go. Tony Manzolino, one of those things he said, basically the first big point he made was our goal right now is to get back to 500. And exactly, I mean, that's what you need to try to do. But right now, this team is 14 games below 500. So it is, I mean, heck, man, maybe tomorrow the 14-game winning streak starts.
Right.
I don't know. They carry over what they did in the ninth inning, the bottom of the ninth inning, not the top of the ninth inning. You carry over that, and you're feeling great.
And if you are looking to be a buying team at the deadline, you have to be not just 500. I mean, you got to be over 500 to convince Mike Elias to buy and not sell.
Yeah, you have to be probably within 5 games of the American League East lead.
Yeah,
it was, and that's just a guess. But I would say you have to be within striking distance at the deadline.
Back in 2022, the Orioles were one of the hottest teams in baseball in July, and they still sold at the deadline.
The fact, and that comes. I think I said that on the radio the other day, 105.7, about the fact that they asked, could this really be a seller? And it was in 2022, that was a team screaming out to 1 or 2 big additions, and that team is a surprise hot team going into the, maybe you make the postseason and you go into the postseason hot. And we've seen teams, the O's have seen buzzsaws, in the form of the Texas Rangers and the Kansas City Royals that have come to this stadium and shellacked them. Actually, in the terms of the Royals, they outpitched them, really.
Yeah. The Tigers were one of those teams last year too. Yeah.
So that I always think back to 2022 of what could have been. And I think that solidifies my belief that if this team is not firmly in the mix, they'll have more of a propensity to sell because they have a long-term vision, not a short-term sell. They actually don't really have that many sellable pieces. To be fair, if you're going to be a buyer, there's not that. I mean, they have a lower in the farm system. There are guys you could do, but there's not as many guys knocking on the door as there was last year.
Yeah,
trading Stowers and Norby, and we won't
discuss.
We don't dive into.
Yeah, that. I mean, the number of guys, some of the guys that are on expiring deals. By the way, I don't want to get too far ahead because we could have a lot of time talking about who the Orioles could sell.
No, this is fun.
Tomoyuki Sugano, Zach Eflin, Cedric Mullins, Ryan O'Hearn, Gary Sanchez, Andrew Kittredge, Sir Anthony Dominguez, Gregory Soto, Tyler O'Neill potentially if he opts out, Kyle Gibson, Charlie Morton, Jorge Mateo. I mean, the list goes on and on.
And I think you look at that list and 4 names stick out to me as guys you would actually be able to sell for profit.
Yeah.
O'Hearn, definitely. Sugano, definitely. Eflin, definitely. And Cedric Mullins could be, I know he's in a little bit of a slump right now, but Cedric Mullins with his, he actually had a blunder in center field today. So it's funny saying, but overall, he could walk into the starting lineup as a center fielder for multiple teams that are chasing pennants right now, including the Phillies actually, and maybe even the Yankees. You could switch Judge over, but so I wouldn't be shocked to see high interest in those 4.
The question though is, is any of these pieces good enough to get a significant return back? Because none of these guys is Manny Machado. None of these guys is of that caliber with the Orioles got back a 5 prospect.
I would say
Hall at the 2018 deadline.
Manny had team control. No,
he was on an expiring deal.
Okay, so then I'll take that back. Turns out I don't know anything. But
he was Manny Machado.
He was Manny Machado, and I also think this is not a number one, we don't know yet. It's May, whatever, 17. So we don't necessarily know how it's going to look, but it could be. I would be shocked to see if it's not a full. If they actually sold, it's not a full rebuild.
Yeah,
it's more
it's a
of
retooling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good GM's lingo
Yeah.
there. That's good, man. You got a future in
Right?
this.
I don't know if the job becomes open. I mean, look, an important thing to remember too from today is that Mike Elias is not out the door. Mike Elias did keep his job, and he deserves a lot of credit in the same way Brandon Hyde deserves a lot of credit for being able to see this rebuild through and take this team to the playoffs. By the way, minor miracle that Brandon Hyde got his career record to 421 and 493 as he leaves the Orioles, because I thought there was going to be no way when you have 4 straight losing seasons that you're going to be able to make your record look anything close to respectable for a long time. So it is a credit to Brandon Hyde. It's also a credit to Mike Elias that this team was a playoff team 2 years in a row. They still do have some of the most talented young players in all of baseball. They still do have some pieces on the farm, not even a top 10 farm anymore, but they have some pieces there. But Mike Elias hired Brandon Hyde. He's going to hire the next manager, we assume. Not many GMs get to hire 3 managers. So the pressure certainly is on Mike Elias now. And I'm not sure how he's going to act with that newfound pressure. I'm not sure if he's going to be more aggressive. I'm not sure if this is going to change his opinion of multi-year deals in free agency. But if he doesn't react to this, and if he doesn't see this as a chance to learn from these mistakes, and if he doesn't take some responsibility for this, then he would not be doing himself any justice, because he should feel a little bit of healthy pressure now, because it is not entirely Brandon Hyde's fault that Brandon Hyde was fired today.
Correct. I think, and we're going to have Danielle Allentuck join us in a second here, as she just finished Clubhouse. But I do think the fact that Mike Elias made the decision today to fire Brandon Hyde, there is no more ability to. I mean, things fall on him. Like at the end of the day, like this is going to be how this season goes. Now is not, the one fall guy has been. It's been cast. That die has been cast, and now whatever happens, we're going to look at Mike Elias and judge this team through the prism of what he did, what he did not do. Yeah. And with that, I'm going to go update a game story.
This is great. We got a great rotation going.
I'm going to let Danielle take over.
This is a little bit better than Charlie Morton relieving Kyle Gibson. I think you both are.
Put respect on Charlie Morton's name. The guy loves Jason Isbell, and he just gave 4 1/3. With run.
That's true.
That wasn't too bad.
That's true. Danielle Allentuck joins us fresh from the Orioles clubhouse as well. And Danielle, I talked with John, I've talked with Andy, and now I want to get your perspective on this. And frankly, I want to talk about the new guy. I want to talk about Tony Mansolino, because you wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months, about a guy that has never managed a big league game before. His last managerial gig, I believe, was in AAA in 2019, he said. This is a very tough situation for him to walk into. And I also, for people who are not as steeped in this Orioles team as we are, also, if you could explain why Tim Cossins was another one to get the boot today, and also why Tony Mansolino was the one that was chosen as to be the Orioles interim manager.
Yeah, I mean, Tim Cossins was a little surprising to me, just because he plays such a big role on his team. He is essentially the guy who coordinates everything about this team, all the bullpens, all the coordinations at spring training. He's the guy who tells every single player what field they need to be on at what time. So he's a very important person on his team, but him and Hyde are a package deal, essentially. They go way back to their Chicago days. They came over together. He was Hyde's hire. It makes a lot of sense why they would fire him at the same time. It just creates a lot of work for Mitch Plasmeyer now to take over in that position.
Right.
But as for Tony, if you look at the rest of his coaching staff, he makes the most sense. Robinson Chirinos has been a coach, period, for 2 months, let alone at the major league level, a coach at any level. Buck Brennan has a lot of major league experience, has a lot of
minor league experience.
He's a lot of managerial experience,
True. Yeah.
But he doesn't have any major league experience. He's also only been here for 2 months. You're not going to take a pitching coach away, because then you have to promote a different pitching coach, and they don't exactly have pitching or hitting coaches to spare these days. So he was really the only option. And he does have a couple years of managerial experience. He did basically all the minor league levels. And he's been here since 2021. So he knows these guys. He's been around. He has had a lot of success with the infield. You know, you look at Ryan Mountcastle. He could barely play defense when he came up, and now he is a Gold Glove finalist at first base. Look at Jackson Holiday, who learned a whole new position last year. And he's just kind of that energetic guy who is keeping things positive. And I agree with the decision that he was probably the best person on the staff to promote.
Yeah, certainly. Kyle and I talked yesterday about just how inexperienced the staff is overall. And I think had Freddie Gonzalez still been here,
Yep.
somebody who left this coaching staff at the start of the 2025 season, I think he probably
Not by his own choice, just to clarify.
Yeah, he would have probably been the one who would have been a natural replacement. And at this point in the season, I mean, the Orioles, Tony Mansolino said after the game, he was asked whether he was given any assurances by Mike Elias that he would be the interim manager for the rest of the season. He said yes. There isn't a lot of track record of teams hiring a long-term permanent manager in the middle of the year.
No.
You know, the 2010 Orioles are a team that I've talked about before as, you know, an outlier when they hired Buck Showalter as the third manager of that team after Dave Tremblay and after Juan Samuel. It's an absolutely critical hire for Mike Elias whenever it occurs, whether it occurs in the middle of the season, I wouldn't expect it, or after the year. I think the Orioles are going to give Tony Mansolino some time to manage this clubhouse and to see if he can turn things around. But ultimately, they're looking at this offseason and saying, we need to nail this hire because this team is too good to have the results that they had in 2025 and frankly for the second half of 2024. So they have to nail this next hire.
Yeah, and I think it makes a lot of sense to wait until the end of the season because you're going to have a better pickup managers. And obviously they can hire somebody now and fire them again. That's not unheard of. That's something they can do, but it's just not something that's done in baseball. So I don't even know if you can say, like, if Tony has a good year, is he going to be the manager next year? Probably not, honestly. You know, he's still super inexperienced. We also don't know if Mike Elias will still be here this offseason. It could be a whole new regime who wants their own people there. So I think there's a lot left up in the air for what they're going to do moving forward. But we do know for sure that Tony has the interim tag for the rest of the season.
Right. And this is a team that it'll be interesting to see how they respond to him.
Yeah.
I got Andy's perspective from the clubhouse as well, but I'm curious, Danielle, you talked to some more players down there. What did you glean from the players and their reaction to losing their manager hours before the game today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most stunning one to me was Cedric Mullins. He's who I was just talking to for a while. He's heartbroken. You know, him and Hyde have been through a lot. You know, they went through the entire rebuild together. He's the only guy who's left from the start of Hyde's tenure. So they've been through a lot. And Cedric feels like he failed Hyde, that he didn't play up to his level. So therefore, Hyde lost his job. And I think he's devastated about that. And he said, you know, Cedric is usually, and I think you can sense it's the most even-keeled guy in there. You know, he's not emotional. He's not up and down. He said today, you know, it was hard to go out and play a game. He was like, I got my manager fired, is essentially what he's saying. And then I had to go pretend like I was okay and play a baseball game. And I mean, I think you saw that, like, he was not great.
Yeah.
He missed a play early on that we all looked at each other. We're like, Cedric makes that play.
Right.
He just looked distracted. So he was heartbroken. I asked him how he thought Tony would do, and he paused for a very long time, as Cedric does a lot of times because he's very thoughtful. And he goes, I think he's going to do okay. But I think he's really trying to get the point across that it is on them. You know, he's already started talking with his teammates. I asked him how they move forward from this, and he's like, just plain and simple, we have to play better, you know? So I think that there's a lot of thinking going on in their heads, and I do think it'll take a couple of days for things to calm down for them, especially because they don't have an off day.
Yeah.
They play tomorrow, they go straight into the road trip.
This is a very difficult time for Tony Mansolino to be taking over.
Yeah.
And Adley Rutschman spoke with the media before the game. He seemed like his head was not entirely where his body was as well. He seemed like somebody who was still processing, and he said he was still processing both Tim Cossins and Brandon Hyde being out the door, because those are guys that were with the organization when Adley Rutschman was first drafted in 2019. It's a lot to be. There's a lot of human elements to this as well that these players have to now deal with, and it's never ideal that somebody takes over in the middle of a season, because you want a new manager to be able to set the tone, to be able to put his points across. And Tony Mansolino said after the game that he hasn't even had time to think about what he would say to the team when he's able to make a full address. All he did was speak after Mike Elias and say, let's go out and win today.
Yeah.
he's not able to put together a plan. I'm sure he's dreamed of this for a long time, and he's got experience from his AAA days, but he now has a lot of pressure on him to be able to try to turn this thing around quickly before they ultimately, make a move as to the future of the season.
And he had hours notice today. He's not like he found out days ago and was able to prepare for a job. He found out and had to go manage a game today. So, obviously that doesn't excuse to play, but this play was put in place before. You're not going to make a difference in 4 hours.
Right. Exactly. Well, we've been podcasting, doing a marathon podcast so long that it has now started to rain at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, and all the lights have been turned off. So we should probably get out of here soon. I do want to get a quick word from our sponsor, though, before we get out of here.
For the 5th year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, Danielle, thanks so much for being the third and final guest on the Banner Baseball Show today. At @D_Allentuck on Twitter.
Yeah.
And on Instagram as well. Your full name, Danielle Allentuck. Starting to post some great Orioles content as well. As she gets back in the game, you may notice there is no brace around her arm.
Yeah, don't ask me to move it. I can't. But
That's kind of important for when you have to lift a recorder in the middle of
I got another arm.
You got one arm.
Yeah, I can type with one arm. I'm doing great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Danielle is continuing to cover this team, and we are all continuing to cover this team. There's plenty more coverage on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months as we deal with the fallout of the firing of manager Brandon Hyde and Tim Cossins. Thanks so much for tuning in. Like, rate, review, subscribe, write us a 5-star review, and I'll read it out here on the show. Very much appreciate it. Thanks so much for tuning in. For John Meoli and Andy Kostka, and now Danielle Allentuck, I'm Paul Mancano.